Thank you, Mr. Dagan. I mean, we'll leave some, that was just food for thought, actually. We are going to elaborate on that in the Q's and A's. This was the first leg of what we call the annual Gandel Symposium. It is kind of a symposium which is being held year by year here under the auspices and the constant support of Honorable John Gandel from Australia. And we do thank him for his constant support. And this is kind of a venue or kind of a symposia which really comes up with some good insights and observations about the current affairs. And this is straight away we're going to move to the second leg of this discussion. As I said before, Egypt, another state which is going through a tumultuous change. We have with us a distinguished guest, Professor Shimon Shamir, a former ambassador of Israel to Egypt and Jordan, currently a TAU professor. Professor Shimon Shamir was one of the builders of Middle Eastern studies and teaching in Israel at large and in Tel Aviv University specifically. He had done a lot in order to promote peace and cooperation between Israel and its neighbors. I'm pretty sure that at this time, this is kind of a question which is very acute, where Egypt is heading to. And we have here a real crossroads. As I said before, we have Morsi versus Shafiq. It's not two persons, it's two different ways, and it would tell a lot of what sort of Egypt we're gonna have in the coming years. This has to do a lot with the regional order and with Israel. And without further ado, will you please join me in welcoming Professor Shamir.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Uzi, for this very generous introduction. Back to the Arabs. The Arab Spring, as it is called, generated a wave of optimism in the Arab world itself and also outside the Arab world. There was a feeling that a new era started in the Middle East. This is a watershed. The modern history of the Middle East will describe as a period until 2011-12 and after. The world was impressed by the dedication, the courage of the people who toppled dictators in their countries or continue to do so in the case of Syria. They were impressed with their willingness to sacrifice and with their devotion to the concept of democracy to replace the dictatorships that had existed there before. It was generally said, from now on, people in the Arab world will no longer be subjects, but they will become citizens. This was the enthusiasm that was generated by the uprisings. As time passed, it transpired that there are also negative aspects to these developments. First, it turned out that in the countries where those uprisings took place or are taking place, there is a process of fragmentation. The state is breaking up. And we must remember that the states, the Arab states, are perhaps one of the most successful achievements of these countries in the process of political modernization. There had not existed states in most cases in the past. It was Ottoman Empire, there were provinces. But in the 20th century, modern states emerged. And those states managed to overcome the internal and the external pressures. Kuwait survived, Lebanon survived, Jordan survived. And they managed to keep together the the wide range of forces existing in each country. And now the Arab Spring unleashed those centrifugal forces. We see in those countries the rise of tribal, of regional, of religious, of ethnic groups trying to pull in their directions and threatening the survival of a good part of the Arab states. This is a worrying development when we look at the consequences of the Arab Spring. Then there is the economy. Economic situation in Arab countries, which had been in precarious situation even before the Arab Spring, are suffering very heavy blows. Tourism is disappearing. Investment no longer there. Industrial production has dwindled. There is more unemployment there. Those masses who are believing that by their uprising they will improve the situation, there will be more social justice, are realizing that there is less money to distribute, that prices are higher, there are shortages, and the prospect is quite gloomy. And number three, as we all know, the rise of Islamist forces. Everywhere where a vacuum was created by the removal of authoritarian regimes, the Islamists stepped forward. Sometimes they took a more moderate form, like in Tunisia, but in many cases it is not the Islamic movement, but the Islamist movements. In other words, the radical version of Islam. We have the Qaeda in Yemen controlling a substantial part of the country. We have Qaeda people actually all over, and other radical organizations whose members had been imprisoned. They are now out. So in light of the complexities of this situation, people, observers are asking themselves more and more, what is the significance of these changes? What is the historical interpretation of what is going on? In other words, what is a paradigm that will help us to understand these dramatic changes? And there are two schools of thought. There are those who say it is a process of democratization. This is the significant part. This school of thought is quite dominant in the West, to a large extent in Washington as well. And it maintains that what is important is that there are no dictators, we have elections. And it doesn't really matter who wins those elections. What is important is that now we have democracy. It's part of a global trend. We saw it in South Africa, we saw it in Eastern Europe after communism. So now it is in the Arab world. This is the important thing, and therefore, this uprising should be supported everywhere. As I think it's been said in Washington and in other capitals, it is important to be on the right side of history. And history leads to democracies. This is one school of thought. Another school of thought, which I find more convincing, is that what is happening actually is Islamization. The Arab world is getting Islamized more and more. This is something that had started even before the Arab Spring. For the last decades of the 20th century were decades in which Islam became more prominent, more influential in the life of Arab countries, and Islamic movements became more and more powerful. And now they are gaining power, and they are going to change the nature of their societies. This is the sea change, the transformation to Islamic political communities. So these are the two ways to interpret what is going on in general. But now let me focus more on Egypt, which is the country of my specialization, where I spent 5 years of my life, and which I keep visiting and trying to observe and understand what is happening there. Now, what happened? in January last year, young people flocked to Tahrir Square, protesting the dictatorship of Mubarak, and they impressed everybody. They were young, they were devoted, they knew how to use cyber instruments, Facebook, Twitter. They broke the barrier of fear, as it was called. They stood up against the security forces of Mubarak. They didn't give up, and they brought about the overthrow of Mubarak. The credit goes to them. The Muslim Brotherhood was not very active at the beginning of the uprising. But then they failed to produce a substitute to the regime. They did not have the organization, they did not have the ideology, they did not have the leadership. They simply paved the road to other forces who did have the organization and who knew exactly what they wanted, and those were the Muslim Brotherhood and the military. They were the two forces, authoritarian forces, and this is a paradox. A young movement devoted to democracy actually brought to power two authoritarian forces that are not very democratic in their general outlook and in their practices. There was an optical illusion here, if you wish, a media illusion. We all watched on TV the masses in Tahrir Square, and television convinced us that this is the face of Egypt. These are the Egyptians. These are the people who are going to mold the future of this country. I went there and I talked to the people in Tahrir Square, and they impressed me. They were peaceful, dedicated, educated, spoke good English. But then I went to 2 or 3 blocks away from there, and there were people sitting in coffee houses, and they were telling me, those people in Tahrir Square, we don't understand them. They are not us. They don't represent us. But this was not shown on TV. They were not interviewed by the media. A new book that appeared recently by Mark Lynch documented President Obama saying, I so much wanted these young people to win. I hoped that the guy from the Google will become the president. Of course, there was no chance of them really taking over Egypt. When elections came, it turned out that they couldn't mobilize more than 4% of the voters to support their programs and their organizations. The other two forces are those who are now in power in Egypt. And let me say a few words about them. There is the army. Perhaps saying the army is wrong because we are talking about the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, a body of 20 generals who really controls the country at the present. They are those who appoint the prime minister. They are those who control the street. They are not just a military organization. They are a big economic concern. They control, economists say, something close to 1/3 of the Egyptian economy. They were the power base of Mubarak. And in order to guarantee their loyalty, they were given many privileges. First, clubs, resort areas, good salaries, and so on. But above all, they were given the ability to establish economic assets. They control industries, factories, companies. They control gas stations throughout the country. They control hotels. They have joint ventures with foreign companies. This in addition, of course, to the military industry. So their interest was, above all, to safeguard their privileges and their control of the economy, and to have a say in the political situation, which will make it possible for them to maintain their position in the polity. Now, they are not a revolutionary force, certainly. Basically, they want the status quo. They want to restore stability and to have a situation which will not be very different from that existed under Mubarak. But they also have weaknesses. I said it is not the army, it is the generals. And we are talking here about the high-ranking officer corps, about 15% of the officer corps. And those in the middle level and the low-ranking officers have a different mindset, a different outlook on the situation. They do not enjoy all those privileges. And we already had, in October, an uprising, which was not reported in the press for some reason, about 500 middle-range officers in Alexandria who revolted and said to the generals, where are we? We hardly managed to finish the months without our months with the salaries we are getting. So the generals cannot be sure about the loyalty of the whole military. Remember also that the soldiers are actually part of Egyptian society. So if in Egyptian society voted 70% for Islamists, it stands to reason that many of the soldiers as well are inclined to support Islamism and not the generals. So the officers are very careful. They try to maintain their control. They try to maintain control using strong measures. When the protesters at Tahrir Square discovered that what happened was that the military is now ruling and started demonstrating, they were suppressed by force. About 15,000 demonstrators were brought to trials in military courts. And, well, we all heard recently about the trial of Mubarak, who was accused of playing a role in the killing of demonstrators. The military did the same. When there was a Coptic demonstration near Maspero, they killed 26 of the demonstrators. 11 demonstrators were killed in Abbasiyah in front of the Ministry of Defense. So this is a force which is very different from what the demonstrators in Tahrir expected. Then we have the Muslim Brotherhood. Of course, it's a well-known organization. It was established in 1928, the first Islamic movement, organized Islamic movement in the region. And then it spread out from Egypt to other countries. In every Arab country, you have Muslim Brethren, sometimes legally, sometimes illegally. The Hamas in Gaza, they are actually a Muslim Brotherhood organization, simply going by a different name. So in a way, it was successful in spite of suppression by the authorities. And they remain loyal to their doctrine. They have two important elements in their doctrine. One is Sharia and one is Jihad. Sharia is Islamic law. They cannot make compromises on the principle that Islamic law must be implemented. It can be implemented gradually, it can be implemented moderately perhaps, but this is the final goal. Egypt must become a country dominated by Islamic law. Their program also calls for establishing a council of Islamic jurists who will control the government, something like the Wilayat al-Faqih, which Mr. Dagan mentioned. The government will be controlled by an Islamic committee that will have the final word on every policy. So they are those who won the elections. At the beginning, they were very cautious. They were not sure about the ability to really seize power in Egypt. So when the time for elections came, they said, we shall not participate in elections in more than 1/3 of the constituencies, of the election regions. They did not want to frighten anybody. They were afraid that if they demonstrate their real power, people will be, especially more seculars, Copts, and others, will be taken back. But they quickly discovered that they can afford being more open, and they challenged the other candidates in the parliamentary elections everywhere and won about 50% of the seats, which gives them control of parliament. Then, once again, they said, we are not going to participate in the presidential elections. Once again, this may frighten people. They will have control of both parliament and presidency, and not everybody in Egypt wants to see an Islamic regime. But once again, they discovered that they can afford it, and they are participating now in the elections very successfully. At the beginning, they cooperated with the army, and the cooperation made sense. The military needed a local civilian force with whom they can work, and the Muslim Brethren were, of course, the best organized and the only really good candidate for such cooperation. And the Muslim Brotherhood needed the umbrella of the officers in order to implement the political process that brought them to power. But very quickly, it turned out that these two forces are competing. And the Muslim Brotherhood is becoming stronger and stronger, while the officers face, as I mentioned, many problems. And this brings us to the elections, to the second round of presidential elections that will take place next Saturday and Sunday. It's very interesting what happened in the first round. When you follow the press and other observers writing on the situation, they discussed such candidates as Amr Moussa, former foreign minister, Secretary General of the Arab League, Abul Futuh, kind of moderate Islamist who was supported by also many liberals. And what about the candidate of the Muslim Brotherhood? 3%, not very charismatic person. Very few people vote for him. What about the military, the general's candidate, Ahmad Shafiq, the former commander of the Air Force? Well, the army is not popular anymore. They don't stand a chance. But these were precisely the two candidates who won the first round. And actually, if instead of looking at the trees, the observers would have focused on the forest itself, they could have said, these are the two forces. There is the military and there is the Brotherhood. So therefore, their candidates will be seen in the next round. And this is what happened. We have now a competition between Ahmad Shafiq, the military, and Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood. There are many speculations who will win. I don't want to risk predicting the outcome, but I can point out several considerations. The military is not very popular, especially after the trial of Mubarak. Many feel that voting for Shafiq would mean going back to the regime and that Mubarak will be pardoned. There are people who say, look, if you take the parties, the non-Islamist parties that participated in the first round, they have a majority. If you take Ahmad Shafiq, you take Amr Moussa, you take the Nasserists, they have more than 60%. In other words, the Islamists will have only 40% at most, and therefore they will lose. But they forget one thing. The supporters of Morsi, of the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, are of two kinds. There are those for whom Islam is the main consideration. It's a very substantial part of Egyptian society. And there are those who do not care really much about Islam, but their vote will be a protest movement, a more protest vote against those who are associated with Mubarak. So a number of secular leaders already said they will vote for Morsi for the Muslim Brotherhood. And if those who say that the convincing paradigm is Islamization, then perhaps the triumph of Morsi is inevitable. Let me say just a few words about the Israeli angle of the situation. I have a few moments for that.
Just 1 minute. So if you
just
could
1 minute.
in 1 minute, I mean, that would be great.
So let me do it this way. I am sure that we'll be asked about where is Israel in this. I will deal with that in the answer.